Okay, today's date is 20 August 2022. My name is Dennis Gill with the Americans in Wartime Experience, and I'm here in Georgetown, Delaware at the Delaware Aviation Museum, and I'm conducting an interview with Rotc. Thank you, Ron. Appreciate it. You could just give us some real quick background about yourself.
Sure.
Where were you born? Where did you grow up?
First of all, Dennis, thank you. Thank you for this opportunity, and thank you for all that you do for our fellow veterans. So I grew up in New York City, went to university, got my degree and a commission at New York University, 1969. And in 1970, I went in the Air Force. And it's kind of interesting the lead up to that, and I'd like to come back to that if you don't mind.
Absolutely.
I really want to start with, I want to introduce some of these incredible men
Absolutely.
that were part of my inspiration in life in general, and for our family to understand, especially these seven brothers. First of all, they were first generation Italian Americans. So they were first generation born in the United States. And they fought our country's battles in two ways: the Great Economic Depression and World War II, and subsequently Korea as well. When I look at those seven brothers, 5 fought actively in World War II. Number 6, who was marching down toward the youngest, went in as the war was ending, was being prepared to be in the Army of Occupation. And number 7, the youngest, served during the Korean War in Europe and other places as well. These incredible 7 men, the first 2 that served in North Africa, served in the 1st Infantry Division and was killed in Kasserine Pass. At the same time, another brother was in North Africa with him, his brother Sal, who was a combat engineer who was hurt somewhere in North Africa and then went on to Sicily and Italy. At the same time, my father was the only one to serve in the Pacific, and I'll talk about him in a moment, along with 2 other brothers. The oldest, Jack, was, in this photo you'll see he's a sailor. He was in a construction battalion, Seabees, and he was in Normandy. The brother closest to my dad was a tanker in the 3rd Armored Division. So essentially we have 7 brothers, and if I include myself as an 8th, because they were like older brothers to me, we had served our country a total of about 30 years, if you look at our combined service. And we participated in the liberation of North Africa, Sicily, Italy, France, Belgium, New Guinea protecting Australia, New Britain, the Philippines, and Kuwait in my case. And we were participating in the liberation, not the occupation, but the liberation of about 8 or 9 countries. So I think it's very important for the family to understand and recognize what first generation foreigners really did for our country. So going forward, they were my inspiration. I had always thought about a career, or at least flying in the Air Force. So in 1967 at New York University, I participated in the Air Force ROTC Advanced Program. I was born in 1948, which put me in a unique position later on in life to meet and spend time with an incredible number of not just veterans, but great commanders that helped define the United States and the services going forward. So in 1967, they took a number of us that were cadets and brought us to an air base upstate New York. And there were about 20 or 25 of us, and that first day we all flew with someone. And then the next day we were down to about 7 or 8 that were going to go to a next step. My first introduction to a truly great man, and I have to confess I was ignorant as to who he was this old, little bit portly colonel who turns out to be Gabby Gabreski, one of the leading aces in Europe of World War II. So we got to fly a second day in really the first Air Force jets, the F-80 Shooting Star. And those of us that went through that, the next day we all reported to the flight surgeon for serious physicals. And I was disappointed to find out I had depth perception problems and that I was not going to be able to fly. So I went back to New York University, and it was an interesting time. The draft was going on, and a lot of my fraternity brothers just were not interested in serving. But more importantly, it was a time when Strategic Air Command was doing the laydown of the major ICBM forces. So they took a number of us, and we became the initial cadre of what is the Minuteman Force today. 1970, when I went on active duty, I was initially assigned to the 455th Strategic Missile Wing, which had been a bomb wing in World War II in 15th Air Force, and then subsequently became the 91st Strategic Missile Wing, which had been the 91st Bomb Group in World War II. Units and airplanes, B-17s, Memphis Belle, Wee Willie, and that becomes later, I'll explain to you, the importance of the effect that had on me. We went through an extensive training in nuclear systems and all the training that went with becoming a combat crew member. And we were then involved in converting the first Minuteman III modernized system into Minot Air Force Base. This was in the early 70s. I might add that that same unit is the 91st, and a lot of those missiles are still on alert 50 plus years later in North Dakota. So they took an initial cadre of us and they teamed us with older members that had been in some of the earlier nuclear rocket programs. And for them, it was difficult to transition to this modern system because we had all of this other interconnectivity in all of the missile systems. So we spent a great deal of time getting up to speed as combat crews, and the first squadron was the 741st Strategic Missile Squadron. The first 2 flights became crucial because it was in the early 70s, and I was on alert during the Arab-Israeli War of 73. And some of those missiles had some very special assignments where we were in the midst of the Cold War. So I started my career in the Air Force in 1970 during the Cold War, and hung up my uniform the end of 1991, having served in the Cold War, having commanded nuclear forces, rocket forces in the 91st and some of the squadrons, being a senior evaluator. It was a time of great social unrest in the Air Force, and we brought in a division commander that was going to deal with all of these personnel issues. I got called into the wing commander's office. When you're a young officer, going to go see the wing commander was usually not going to be a very pleasant experience. And he was an old school kind of guy, but he turned out to be a great man. And I walked in and saluted, and I said, "Sir," that was the first lieutenant getting promoted to captain. I said, "Reporting, sir." And he said, "General Hinton's going to come in to be the 810th Air Division commander, and we've decided you're going to be his aide." And I said, eyebrows up. I was going to keep my position as a combat crew commander and as a senior instructor. And I said, "But I don't know anything about cooking and doing all these things." And he laughed and he said, "That's not what you're going to be doing. the Air Division is going to be small. You are going to be the only missile operations officer on that staff. And we expect you to be able to do a number of things. So it became quite an interesting experience. We at Minot had the missile wing, a bomb wing, a 106 Squadron, and we were constantly on alert. I was transitioning into what became the Airborne Launch Control System, and then Looking Glass, which was the SAC Airborne Command Post, to which there was always a full battle staff and 2 nuclear release officers, a general officer and a missile officer that had that kind of experience, because we needed to have that kind of experience at different echelons of command. That was an incredible experience, and 4.5 years doing that, representing the wing at missile competitions and other things. And then this general had gone back to be the SAC Inspector General, was going to be assigned as the 15th Air Force Vice Commander. And I got a call from my wing commander again and said, General Hinton would, if you want to go to Southern California, we had been at Minot in North Dakota, if you want to do that, he'd like you to be his aide as the vice commander. I looked at my wife, she said, yes, let's go. It was, again, an interesting time. 3 years on the 15th Air Force staff, because there were 3 numbered Air Forces in Strategic Air Command at the time. The 2nd Air Force, which was on Guam at the time, 8th Air Force that commanded everything from the Mississippi East, and 15th Air Force, where we had not only bomber and tanker forces all west of the Mississippi, but we had all the Minuteman. We had about 22 squadrons of Minuteman intercontinental ballistic missiles. We had all of the strategic reconnaissance at the time. U-2s, SR-71s, RC-135s. So it was a time of great transition yet again, and I went on to be the commander's aide, a great guy, 3-button by the name of Bill Pitts. And a lot of the senior staff then had come out of World War II. They had been B-29 guys, some of them B-17, B-24, and they were learning themselves a lot about the missile. So he referred to me, and I picked up the moniker as the Rocket Man. So I would end up with being in these different echelons when they weren't quite sure that I would have the opportunity to have an input. It also gave me some incredible clearances that had to do with strategic reconnaissance that would be fit into a later career. So when the time came to leave March, I was going to go to Offutt Air Force Base, SAC headquarters. Flying Looking Glass, which was an alert airplane, and being on alert either out in the missile silos or on base. In the middle, I had managed to get a master's degree when I was in California, and some of us were, back in the early days of Apollo, the Air Force had an agreement with NASA that basically said one of the Air Force's requirements or assignments was going to be to build the first permanent facilities on the moon. So 10 of us were picked to be part of that program. And I go up to Offutt, I have my interview, and I go see the guy who turns out to be the vice commander, 3-button, different guy now. And I walked in, and I had been his aide along the way. And he was kind of this old Virginia gentleman who referred to me always as his irreverent New Yorker. And I went in and I said, that's not my background. I can't, I'm going to be part of a team that's going to design and do these things on the moon. And he said, no, be quiet, you can do it. He said, I want somebody in there there are going to be 9 eggheads in you. And your job is going to be to make sure that we don't design the worst mousetrap in the world. You're going to be Mr. Ergonomics. You're going to do all of those things. And I went home and told my wife, and her first reaction was, you don't know how to do that. And I said, that's 2 of us now who said that. And she said, I bet it's General Harris. And I said, yeah, he seems to think he wants me to do this job. Anyway, all those years on the SAC staff, the Apollo program went away, other responsibilities. I had still been involved now as a nuclear missile officer in the early stages of a lot of the satellite programs that we have just started talking about years later, Talon Keyhole and some of these other things. And on the SAC staff, I went from being in operations to ops plans on the XO side. And we were doing a lot of interesting things that some that are highly classified probably till today, but three projects that I worked on was writing the nuclear weapons employment policy, where I was part of a study where we did launch on attack and launch on warning. And then another program where we were using deep space to do other things in a way that could be very at defining moments in warfare. Went on to staff college, and from there was assigned to the Pentagon, and I got picked up by this other three-star to do congressional relations, which I wasn't sure why, but he seemed to think that I would be good at it. I ended up very shortly into a meeting with the Secretary of the Air Force and a couple of very senior guys, and I was a major at the time. And we got into a number of discussions, and they looked at me, and it's like I was the expert in the room on some of these things. And I just gave my views, and when it was over, Pete Aldridge, who was the secretary, incredible guy, always had a military assistant and a POLAD, a political advisor. The POLAD was usually a senior State Department officer, and the deputy POLAD was always a uniformed Air Force officer. That got to be me. And what the State Department officer did not know at the time was I was also in the NRO, the National Reconnaissance Office. At that time, those initials, just the NRO, associated with any military background was classified secret. Then you got into some very, very compartmentalized areas, and I had clearances, he didn't. So Pete would pull me, Secretary would pull me into things and tell the other guy to stay out of the room, which was kind of an interesting dynamic. Long story short, that became the basis with the rocket background and space background, national reconnaissance, for a lot of things that we were going to go forward. That became the basis of Space Command, now the Space Forces. So I ended up as political advisor in the NRO doing things. And from there I went to War College. It was funny because I had completed Air War College by seminar in the Pentagon. And when I came out on the list, I was an early lieutenant colonel. And I was on the War College list, and Pete Aldridge said, let me see if I can guess. You want to go to National War College? Because I had been to Air War. And I said, no, sir, actually, I'd like to go to Army War College. And he said, that's in Pennsylvania? I said, yes. He said, I'll tell you what, take 2 aspirin, lie down, take a nap, and I'll ask you this again when you wake up. And I said, no, I'm serious. It was a great school, and it was an incredible experience, because in the class of '87, I would see all my classmates in the desert. And I was the youngest guy in the class as a lieutenant colonel, but these other guys had been battalion commanders, and the next time in the desert, they were leading the brigades and doing all these incredible things. So I went off to Carlisle, and it was an incredible year, came back and turned down a squadron, which in the Air Force, everybody said, you'll never get promoted. And I said, well, that's okay. You know, we do what we have to do. So I went to political military affairs in the Office of Secretary of Defense. And I eventually became a military assistant for international to Dick Cheney when he was SecDef. And when I had been promoted to colonel, had been out in the desert with him, and we came back, and SAC was transitioning into Global Strike Command, and there was a lot going on. And I was scheduled, or I was on the list to go be a wing commander. I was a walk-on from New York University, and it was quite a heady time to be able to do these things. At the time, Paul Wolfowitz called me in and he said, "Now this is how these guys talk. This is not me dropping names. Dick has other ideas for you," meaning Secretary Cheney. And the way we had it set up in the office of the Undersecretary for Policy, we had regional bureaus. And all of the different regional bureaus had an assistant, a deputy assistant, or an assistant secretary that was either a political appointee or a very, very senior 3-star or above. In fact, Admiral Crowe had been in one of those jobs, who had gone on to be CNO. And the below that was the director, and Wolfowitz said, "Dick wants you to take that job." And I said, "Well, in the Western Hemisphere Bureau." And I thought, of all my experience, and not a lot has been in the Americas in terms of South America, Canada, etc. And he said, and I said, "Well, Mike Byron they had 2 directors. One was Mike Byron, who was a Marine brigadier who just came out on their 2-star list. And a guy had been a retired naval officer who was an SCS. And I said, "What's my role?" He said, "Well, Mike," this is how they talk. He was General Byron. "Mike is going back to the Marines. They want him back. And the other person, it doesn't matter what his name is useless, and we're going to send him over to NDU to write books. Secretary wants you to go take it and put some leadership in that bureau." Bottom line is, I did. I became the director. I took off my uniform, and now I'm thinking, what do I tell this other 3-star? Because now, as a young colonel, I'm doing a lot of political stuff. And in fact, it got kind of sticky because Sink South at the time was an Army 4-star that had a Navy 3-star. And here I am, the director, giving some of the political direction to these guys. And I would talk to them and I'd say, "Sir, Ron," I was always deferential. I didn't say colonel. I just had my uniform off. I hadn't retired. And the Navy 3-star, when he figured out that I was only an Air Force colonel, decided to rip me a new one. And I said, "I've heard what you said, Admiral. You go up your channel. My direction is to go see the secretary and just give him the gist of this conversation. Not threatening, not trying to be disrespectful." Before I got to do that, I got called into the Air Force Vice Chief of Staff's office, Mike Lowe, fantastic guy, who had his leg in a cast. And I walked in, saluted, and said, "Sir?" And he said, "Pour us both a cup of coffee. Sit down over there." And he said, "For a colonel, you're doing a lot of political stuff." And I said, "Sir?" And he said, "I know what you're going to tell me. You didn't set this up. It's this, that, and the other." So I said, "That's it. That's the story, and I'm sticking to it." Anyway, he said, "Well, SAC has other plans for you, this, that, and the other. We do." So I said, "I'm trying to be respectful. I'm caught between a lot of senior folks." Anyway, long story short, I went back, and Wolfowitz said, "The assistant secretary for the region is leaving, and you are going to be secretary, talk to White House Personnel Office. You are going to be the acting until Senate confirmation, because assistant secretaries, you just retire just like that." So anyway, I did all of that, and I went on, I stayed on, and then became an SCS 3 for a short period of time. Having said that, it was the time of my life. I could do nothing wrong. I could step in bad stuff and come up smelling like a rose for whatever reason. So that was 25 years of just great experiences and incredible people. I had the privilege of working for a couple of presidents along the way and some great captains, just wonderful folks. Corporate America came along, and I spent the next 20 years in the midst of a lot of corporate consolidation I started out as the vice president in the space division of General Dynamics, and then moved to take the Washington office, and then Lockheed as vice president in aeronautics, some of the airplanes we've been talking about, including the fighter programs. 1995, I was part of a team that took Lockheed and Martin Marietta, created Lockheed Martin. We instantly became what had been 17 corporations, 92 companies, 152,000 employees, half of which of us were scientists or engineers. And it was just an incredible experience. When I opted to retire for a lot of reasons from there, now 11 years ago, I was president of all global business. And that took me all around the world, 72 countries doing business. I say all that to say I've just been incredibly fortunate to have this wonderful career and work with really top-notch people. Along the way, I've met some not so top-notch people. And I made myself a promise when I retired, when I hung up my blue suit, that I would never do anything that would betray my sense of integrity, that I would put my line badge on the table. And I grew up with the values of hard work, honesty, and be a decent person. And, you know, if there are two things that shaped my life, good, bad, or otherwise, with my family values, those incredible men, and the United States Air Force. So twice during my career in corporate America, I was involved in some things that I said, we're not going to do that. And once somebody said, who are you to say? And I said, I'm somebody who will put my badge on the table right now and walk out the door. And we were able to convince others that it was not a good idea. And then later on. But it's all about incredible people being great role models. And that's what we've been doing here at this museum. Larry Kelly, who started it all, Larry and I have been friends for 25 years. And we've taken, as you know, part of your great museum, an airplane, built a great story around it for our veterans and our students. We've incorporated other airplanes. We've helped create STEM programs, science, technology, engineering, and math, throughout the state of Delaware in a number of schools. We're doing the same with Young Eagles and introducing kids to potential careers in aviation. And the first thing we tell them is, this is not about being a pilot. It's one part of it. It's pilots, it's maintainers, it's IT, it's the airlines, it's air traffic control. And that has only grown more and more. So for 55 or so years, I've been doing this, and it's been incredibly satisfying. My wife used to say, all you do is fly airplanes and launch rockets, and somebody pays you to do it. And I would say, yeah, you're right. And what's the point?
Right.
So I guess I would say I feel sorry for anyone who has a job that they don't like and they don't. And I tell all the kids that we get to talk to that, hey, this is America. You can do, you can be whoever and whatever you want. You just have to work for it. You won't always have that opportunity. It's not going to be easy. Our economic divide and where I see people going is exacerbating potential problems. But these are things that you can do. You just have to want them, and you have to be willing to work for them. So I guess in all of this, I look at my life, and I appreciate this opportunity because last week I turned 74, and my mother is still alive at 104. So I may have 30 years of runway ahead of me, or I may not. You know, none of us really know. But I would like the family and posterity to understand that we have been privileged. We are blessed as a nation, as family, to take basic good values and take those forward and by example Don't talk the talk unless you're going to walk the walk. I tell everybody the same thing. Don't say something that you don't intend to do just to hear yourself or to try to impress someone. At the end of the day, you'll get to look back, and I can look back and say there are very few things that I would change. And I look at the next few years, and at some point I'll show you the airplane that we've spent 4 years bringing back to flying status, and the Air Force colors and the nose art and the crew members that were blasted out of the sky. Their names are on the airplane over Berlin from the 91st Bomb Group, and we'll never forget them. And that's the beauty of our Air Force. Our motto is, least we forget. September, less than a month away now, will be the 75th anniversary of our Air Force. We will be in a tattoo, a flying formation, we being that beautiful airplane, the B-25, with B-17, B-24, some P-51s, and some fast movers from the Heritage Air Force, flying that memorial to those 75 years. So, we all have this thing I call a franchise on life. When it starts, we don't know where it's going to end or when it's going to end. So we take these opportunities, and so many of my contemporaries from the Air Force, from corporate America, from friends around the world, at this point in our lives, it's really about making sure we give back to succeeding generations some of these incredible opportunities that we have had. So with that, you pulled my string. I'll stop and answer any questions or any of these thoughts that you want me to further elaborate on.
You covered a lot. Let me go back to something you said that something that really interests me. And you talked about you were part of a team that was going to build a base on the moon.
Yeah.
What was that going to be about? Where did that end up going?
Yeah. So interesting. This general who had been the vice commander of 15th, Ed Harris, goes to Offutt to be the vice sync, gets his 3rd star. And he tells me, let me know when you're ready to come to Offutt. And I said, let me finish my MBA. I've tried this too many times. He said, get it finished. This is what he would do. Get it over with and come. I get a call from the base civil engineer's office. Colonel Holtman would like you to come up for an interview. Now I'm thinking, holy Christ, civil engineers? In the Air Force, that's not what a lot of people want to do. So I go up there, and he's a great guy. In fact, I had built a house close to him as a result of that. And SAC had, the Air Force had this agreement, as they had with NASA on a number of things, with CIA and the nuclear warning and NRO and other things. And he said, yes. He said, here's where we're at. The Apollo program we think is going to end up winding down. This program, our mission, and it was given to Strategic Air Command, was to look at building the permanent facilities on the moon. Now, you and I know we're going to go back to the moon after 50 years, since the last time anybody walked on it. But he said, and I said, I'm listening to all this wondering, so what does that have to do with me? And he said, General Harris thinks that you should be part of this team. And that's really the first time I said, Colonel Holtman, I'm not, of all the people that have all these incredible backgrounds, that's not my background. Why me? And he laughed. He said, because General Harris thinks you'd be a good pick. And he said he has some other ideas that he wants you to be part of this team. And he said, but frankly, I don't know where it's all going to go. I went back home. I told Joanne, we did all this. And right about that, the whole Apollo program was just going to go away. And I think it was President Carter who said, we're not going to spend any more money doing all this stuff. So that was, but along the way from 15th Air Force, being the missile ops guy, to having the clearances in the strategic reconnaissance, it was all of the stepping stone, because as you and I know, strategic reconnaissance became national reconnaissance. I mean, we were back then doing what is no longer classified, Talent Keyhole, doing all these programs that it was very logical for me to get pushed from one to the other to the other.
Right.
So that, and I thought, wow, I'm flattered, but how am I going to do this one? And here's the other thing that became really unique. Along the way, I remember I said I was born 3 years after the war ended. I had the opportunity to meet so many of these great commanders. I'll start with Jimmy Doolittle. I was a captain on the SAC staff when he came to visit Offutt, and I had been in operations, and I had become part of a small group that was going to be his escort officer, and I was taking him to the SAC Underground, and I had a few minutes to actually talk to the guy, to talk to the man, Jimmy Doolittle, of all people. And then later, we've done all these things with the Doolittle Raiders. General LeMay, interesting guy. He retired as Chief of Staff of the Air Force in about 65 or 66. He moved to Newport Beach, California, and 15th Air Force, which is one of those storied combat commands that had gone up and down and had been retired, and 2 years ago was brought back to active as all the fighters in Air Combat Command. He lived about 45 minutes from March Air Force Base. And he would come out to March from time to time. Either we were going to put him on a T-39 back then and take him to Washington. But anyway, he would come out, and it was funny because he was an interesting man in so many ways. And I was a captain, and my three-star boss would say, now, if you know anything at all about him, he started auto clubs in the Air Force, flying clubs, and at that point, he still drove a hot rod gold Camaro. And my boss says to me, this three-star to this '03 railroad kid, get out there, meet him at the gate, and don't let him drive. And I said, okay. So I go, and I had done this several times.
Right.
And he was this kind of guy. He would say, I'd say, General, how about, why don't you let me drive today? He'd say, get in and be quiet. And he had two speeds, stop and go like hell. So I always had the air police then, the Sky Cops commander with the cars and the sirens. But I got to know him, and we got to fly sometimes together. And I later read, and I have a copy signed to me, Mission with LeMay, My Story. And he is an interesting guy in so many ways, and so many people tend to villainize him as being the growly guy with the cigar in his mouth, saying bomb him into the Stone Ages and things like that. Well, guess what? He never said that. He grew up in the Midwest, very modest. His father was moved from state to state. He goes to Ohio State. He joins the Ohio National Guard as an artilleryman. He later goes on to join to get transferred into the Air Corps and do these other things. And you read his memoirs and you pick up this trend in him. It wasn't lack of confidence, but he wasn't sure that he always was smart enough to do the things he was going to be asked to do. Ergo, he studied like hell and took the hard road. And he was a fighter pilot in the early days, and he said, I'm going to move to bombers because they're going to make the difference. Yeah. So he was a person of vision. The scowl that he had on his face, very few people know that he had Bell's palsy. And his face never totally went back to normal. So when you see General LeMay, he's always kind of scowling with the cigar stuck in his mouth. His vision was, I hate war, I hate destruction, I hate all of this. But he said, those of us that are entrusted with doing it, it's now incumbent upon us to do it and get it over with as hard and as fast as you can, because in the long run, you're going to save lives. He said, we don't want to pick fights, but if it's going to happen, he said, Ron, you got to hit him. You got to hit him hard. You got to hit him fast, and don't stop until it's over. That was his philosophy. And I'm hearing these things. One anecdote. Kelly Johnson, the designer from the P-38 all the way through the Skunk Works. Well, I said we had all the strategic reconnaissance in 15th Air Force. When Kelly Johnson was retiring, one of the parties we had for him was at the Officers Club at March. And so we had Kelly Johnson, a big grouping. We were all in mess dress or tuxedos. And we're standing at the bar, and it's my boss, General Pitts, General LeMay in a tuxedo, Kelly Johnson, and Bob Hope, of all people, and me, kind of getting the drinks and doing what captains do. So I meet Bob Hope, and I always enjoyed his movies, and I shook his hand and I said, well, I finally meet the Lemon Drop Kid, which was one of my favorite movies. And he looked at me and he laughed, and my boss went and he said to General Pitts, it was a movie. He's not being sarcastic. Anyway, in the course of the conversation, it gets quiet standing at the bar. So my boss, General Pitts, turns to General LeMay and says, why don't you tell Kelly about that 45 that you developed? Now, if you read a lot of his memoirs, early days in the bomber groups and what he did, the B-17s were going to have 30 calibers, and he said, you know, whose stupid idea is that? These are things we have to do, put 50s on, and all these other things. And he always thought that as a combat crew commander, all I carried was the 38 revolver. That's what all the SAC crew guys carried, right? He thought we should go back to 45, so he developed a smaller version of the 45. And so he says, Pitts says to him, why don't you tell him about this 45? General May opens his coat, takes it out, and racks all these empty rounds. And I'm picking up 45 slugs with these great giants of aviation. So yeah, these are the things that really impress you, because along the way, one of the flag officers, this guy Ed Harris, who called me his irreverent New Yorker, every day we were together, he'd say, at the end of the day, tell me what you learned today. And I quickly learned that I could watch people and note to self, don't do that, because they were going to make a complete ass out of themselves, or note to self, that's good. So you get to see these things, and you get to spend time, and that my time with Secretary Cheney, a couple of the presidents that I worked for, were just common men that rose to the occasion and did extraordinary things. You know, so those are some of the things that helped me enjoy life in this great aviation space defense career. So I'm sorry.
Thinking about your career, what is the one thing that stands out, the one thing that you're most proud of? Your career in the military.
I would say that the values that I learned in the Air Force. I think I said earlier, if you were to ask me what defines you, I would say two things: family values and the United States Air Force. And as I said, I was basically a walk-on. I wanted to fly and do some things. But what stands out is the honesty, the integrity, and the sense of duty and commitment. That's what I remember. And I could look back on any set of circumstances. We were at a veterans affair in Washington just a couple of years ago. Larry was there, myself, Dick Cole, who was Jimmy Doolittle's co-pilot, and a few other great luminaries, including Bud Anderson, great fighter pilot. And we were sitting at a table eating, and we're talking about these different things. And when we get up to leave, you know, Dick is a little wobbly, some of these older guys are, and we're going to be walking, and Bud Anderson, who I had never met before, didn't know me from a bag of donuts or a bag of you-know-what. He was a little wobbly, and he just took my arm to steady himself. And I remember what a sense of confidence, what a great moment to be next to someone like this. who at a difficult moment in his life, touched me and said, make sure I don't fall or I don't get hurt. So it's those little things that you remember. There's a great story about some of the Doolittle Raiders that you get to know. And some of them they were all incredible people. And I think Tom Brokaw had it right about the greatest generation. And I look back historically, and I think there were three great generations of the Americans. Founding fathers, the fathers of the Civil War, and the generation that put us on the world stage, the World War II generation. I don't know where it's all going to go right now. These are difficult times, no doubt about it. But at the end of the day, there were many touching moments like that you look back on and you're very satisfied and grateful to have been given the opportunity to participate.
Yeah. What advice would you give a young man or woman, somebody who's thinking about a career in the military?
I would start with the basic advice I give any young person. Serve our country. You don't have to be in the military. Do something. We should all give back. My philosophy with 4 kids and 6 grandkids is you always put back a little bit more than you take. That made us a great nation. That can carry us through. So I would say, whether you wear a uniform, you're a fireman, a policeman, a doctor, a teacher, do something to serve your country. Now, as far as a youngster that's interested in the military or not interested, I talk about these things and I say, here are some things to think about. Being in the, first of all, I won't say I rue the day, but it's really too bad when the draft went away for a lot of reasons, including when people don't have access. They don't have to make choices like I'll go in the Navy or the Air Force because I don't want to carry a rifle, whatever the reason. They have no idea what they're missing. They have these anywhere from preconceived notions to things they read or things that people say that are outrageously wrong, but they have no inhibition about being what I would call assertively ill-advised. And what I would say is, look at an individual, whether you go in the Guard or the Reserves, or you want to go to the Academy, or you want to go to a university. You don't have access to seeing all that's out there. But here's what you will happen. You will be given responsibility. You will be successful. You will gain confidence. And frankly, the people that you will meet, whether it's a brief sojourn or you get to spend a lifetime with great guys like John Carr over there and some of these other guys, and afterward, they're your friends and they're your brothers for life. These are things that you just would not know about had you not had the opportunity to serve and do some of these things. So I would say, look at it with an open mind, but most importantly, be all that you can be. Seek excellence. 2 words that I learned from an interesting guy. Back here, I've shown you some of the things that we do with the Tuskegee Airmen. Charlie McGee, General McGee, he and I shared a stage a couple of years ago. And I had he was an incredible gentleman, just this wonderful guy, and a great warrior. And I remember him. We talked about a lot of things, and I asked him, "What would you tell this generation?" And he said 2 words: seek excellence. And there's a lot to be said in those 2 words. You have to develop them, and a lot has to do with some of the things that you and I talked about. But it's been an incredible run. Started out in this thing called an F-80, first jet in the Air Force that became the T-33, flying with one of the leading legendary guys and not even knowing it, to ending up in nuclear rockets, strategic air command, space programs, coming all the way to the end, running these great programs in corporate America, and being back where it all started. General aviation and warbirds. So I'll be forever grateful to guys like Larry Kelly that have been great friends, that have guys like yourself, people that look at the museums and say, there's an important story here that has to be passed on to other generations. And again, I just consider myself very, very fortunate.
Yeah. So to conclude, tell us a little bit about the Delaware Aviation Museum.
It's a great foundation. It's a 501c3. We've used the airplanes, especially the centerpiece, the B-25, to do a lot of things for veterans, for our students, for education. I told you we take it to test pilot school. Over the years, we have grown this from an interesting hangar with interesting airplanes to a museum, carving out space, great collections of memorabilia. I could take you out in the trailer and show you one of the most incredible collection of books about aviation, history, warfare, all of these things. Nobody reads books anymore, they Google something, right? So the museum has grown, and we are continuously looking at ways to better serve the community and the follow-on generation of kids. A lot of museums have funding, whether it's parastatal or from the Fed or the state, or foundations like Collins Foundation. We've done a lot of it on our own nickels and dimes. Happy to do so. We're now getting some good support. But that's what it does. And I look at this museum, and I look at Fort Miles up on the entry to Delaware Bay, and I look at your wonderful museum, and I think we all have a great story to tell. And I've been out to your museum. It's been many years ago. And now I'm looking forward to going back in September, because I know how it has grown, and I'm going to take, what we've done with our young eagles. We started this one program, we now have 5. Our first young eagle got involved when he was young eagles is anywhere from 8 to 17. He's been sitting in and out of that airplane many years. We took him up in a 172, we got him checked out, he came back all excited. He had to wait until he was 16 to solo. Yeah. He soloed. He could fly in at a Potomac field, which is in the FRZ and the SFRA, before he could drive in Virginia beyond, by himself. The next young eagle is in about 2 weeks from now, 3 weeks from now, will be in the freshman class at Yale with the Navy Flying ROTC Scholarship. So that is where we started, where we're going. I think I've got a couple of years left to give here. And then it's time to just do some other things. We're really concentrating hard here, especially on the minorities, Black and Hispanics, because Delaware is a wonderful state. If you're fortunate enough to have a beach house, you don't have to go too far, a couple of miles in, and you find people that are living paycheck to paycheck. They've never flown, they have no idea what's available for these kids. So many of them would graduate local high school and flip burgers or sell used cars. Nothing that's not noble about that. It's simply we are trying to give them other things to think about at defining moments in their life over a time and a place where they can have some great future. I mean, you see it all the time. The predictions on shortages here, there, and everywhere. So the museum has been on a mission of honoring people, veterans, and the aviation giants upon whose shoulders we stand and follow their contrails, to honoring veterans, to educating and inspiring future generations. That's what this museum is about.
Well, that's wonderful. That's wonderful. Well, Ron, I want to thank you for sitting down and talking to us. Thank you for your service. Thank you for your continued service and your hospitality. It's a pleasure being here.
Thank you. It's been an honor. It really has across the spectrum. Thank you.